Hello, everybody. It's Stephen and Walter here for another episode of So Chatty, episode number 133 for March the 1st, 2024. We're moving right along in this year. So today we are continuing our series on machine embroidery, and we're going to be talking about in the hoop applique. But before we get to that, let's take a look at what we've been working on. Walter hasn't been working on anything except making my life miserable. Let's see here. I gotta hit the right button. There we go. Okay, so I now have all of the rows together for my next quilt pattern. This is one that I am writing. It's original to me. I've got to put borders on it yet, and then I have to go through the pattern as I write it. I've been editing it as I've been working on it and making sure everything is clear. And this pattern will come out in about the last week of April, a week before the spring retreat. And spring retreat, if you have not already heard me speak of it, it happens on May the 4th. No details yet. I will be putting something out probably a few days before we leave for Australia, which isn't until the end of this month, end of March. And then when we come back, it'll be registration time and everything like that. So, and that's of course before then, that's when the pattern will come out, and yeah, and it will be free, just like my other one. And the other one, this one I'm calling right now because I haven't come up with a better name for it, windmills and stars. But I'm still open to another name for it. I haven't decided yet. Walter may come up with something clever. He often does, much to my chagrin. Yeah, so my first pattern is still available. I haven't taken it down, so there's a link in the show notes. It's free. If you want it, take it. It's yours. And I've been seeing some of the ones that people have been doing with my pattern, and there's some fantastic looking quilts. God, I'm good on at designing this. And I haven't had anybody complain about any of the patterns, except I did get an email the other day from one of my subscribers in Australia who thought maybe I should also put in measurements in metric. Well, yeah, Australia has a metric system like we do in Canada, but nowhere do we buy our fabrics or have patterns that are written in metric. So no, I'm not doing that. That'll just confuse people and confuse the heck out of me too, because I don't think in metric when it comes to quilting. So that's not going to happen, and I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that because we're all pretty much used to doing patterns in inches and feet and all that kind of thing. I don't know if over in Europe, if they have a patterns. Well, I think they get a lot of their patterns from North America.
I've gotten clothing patterns where it's both in metric, and maybe that's where she's coming from, because maybe she sells garments, because garments often have metric and yardage.
Yeah.
So,
but you know, if I was charging big bucks for the pattern or something, I might consider it, you know, but I'm not. It's free. So that's the measurements it's going to be in, but thanks for the suggestion. Okay, so what have you haven't got my shirt done yet, have you?
No, I still got to put buttons on.
Oh yeah, buttons are easy.
I'll definitely put them on next couple of days. Sunday for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah, because, and that's leading me now into announcements. So first of all, we do have a men's, emphasis on men's, sorry ladies, sew day on Sunday, this Sunday, March the 3rd, starting at 8 a.m., running until 3 p.m. Eastern time. The link is in the show notes, and anybody that's on the mailing list for the men's sew day, you've already received your notification of it as well. But new guys are welcome as well. You don't have to be there for the whole day. You don't have to show up right at 8 a.m. We know all about time zones, although I'm starting to discover that there are a lot of people that do not understand time zones. I think it's the same people who don't understand currency exchange rates as well. Just saying. But anyways, you can come for an hour, 2 hours, stay for the day, whatever, come at noon, whatever floats your boat. Okay, I'll be here. Walter may be here at some point. And yeah, and it's usually a good time. Very different from a day where I'm used to having all the ladies And don't ask me, ladies, because I'd have to kill you if I gave you the reason why it's different. Okay? We're not going. It's a men's club. Okay? No girls allowed. All right. But for those of you, do not despair. There's all kinds of opportunities to get involved on a sew day. As always, every Wednesday, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we have Sewing with Stephanie and Steven. So that's always a lot of fun. A lot of yapping there. Yep. There's never a dull moment at all on it. Learn a lot. And not necessarily learn a lot about sewing either. That's usually there. But we also learn things like, did you know that fish fart? I didn't. That was one of the topics of discussion. Apparently, they do. We've learned other things, too. Whether or not an underwire in a bra is really necessary. Depends, I guess. I haven't been looking into that, but I may have to soon. And other things that really I probably don't need to know at all. But you might. So come join us. And tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a live event happening on Stephanie Stitches' channel. Stephanie Stitches' channel. You all know Stephanie. You know that recently she went over a huge milestone in subscriber numbers, 20,000. And we're having a party online. We've got the Fabulous Five are going to be there. And if you don't know who the Fabulous Five are, well, 2 out of the 5 of us are sitting right in front of you right now. And we are fabulous with that.
Yeah, just come and see.
Yep. And then there's, of course, Stephanie, and then Shannon from Slay Arts, and, of course, Russ from Quilt Meets World. So 5 of us will be there. I'm not really sure what we're going to talk about, but I do know there will be booze involved. So it's a party. A party hardy. We're going to party like it was 1999. Of course, when it was 1999, I was considerably younger, so I could probably party longer. But it starts at 7 p.m. Check out Stephanie's channel because that's where you'll find the link for it. It is a YouTube live. We'll be all connected via Zoom, but everybody else will be in the chat section of it. And also, we had earlier this week, we had another celebration. It's been a week of celebrations. We had Shannon's 1,000 plus subscriber bash, and that was on Tuesday night. And again, Fabulous 5 plus, a couple of extras, actually 3 extras at one point came along for that as well. Now, Russ is getting close to 1,000. No, actually, no, he's gone over 1,000. He's finally gone over 1,000. So down the road, another celebration coming up. I don't know when. Russ has not determined the date of that yet, so stay tuned. So lots of things coming up. Now, what else? Oh, yes, another announcement on Stephanie's behalf. Stephanie is having a virtual retreat, she and Shannon. Some of you may have gone to the last one they had about a month or so ago. This one, I believe, is on June the 23rd. It's a Sunday. You can go to Stephanie's retreat site and you can find out all the information there. And registration is now open, and we're registered for it. We registered first thing this morning because that's always a good time too. And we learn quite a bit.
Yeah, we learn what we don't like to do.
Yes, we learn what we don't like to do.
That's not true.
That's not true. Well, it's kind of. I learned that I'm not a fan of paper piecing, but
I don't mind it.
Yeah.
So far, but I only did one project, so
yeah. I mean, I don't hate it. I see its place and everything, and Shannon's a great instructor for it. So nothing against Shannon about it because that's her jam.
And maybe I wouldn't mind trying another paper piecing project just to see if I can date it.
Well, I have a feeling you're going to get another opportunity.
Okay.
At the retreat as well. So yeah. There's a couple of patterns involved, I guess. That's about all I know about it.
They really should kind of show you what kind of patterns you're doing.
Well, they're keeping it under wraps.
Okay,
I guess
it's a mystery. Though.
It's a mystery. It is a mystery.
It's a mystery, yeah.
All will be revealed in good time. Yes. Okay, so those are the things coming up. So today we're going to talk about In the Hoop Applique. Now, when I first got into quilting, and before I had an embroidery machine, I didn't even really know what applique was or what it was all about. And I really had thought at that point in time, nope, not going into that, because it seemed to me a lot of very intricate sewing. I mean, basically you're taking shapes of fabric and sewing them down to a quilt or whatever you're making and that. And I thought, I don't know how good I'm going to be at that. I'll probably go outside of the lines. But I did try it. I've actually made a whole quilt. That's main feature is applique. It hangs on the wall in our bedroom. Now, it's a huge quilt, and I'm very proud of that quilt. But at the point when I did that quilt, I'd already done some applique. And you want to know something? It's not that scary. But there seems to be two types of people out there. Ones who absolutely love applique. And then the ones who, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Well, if you have an embroidery machine, you need not fear applique anymore, because doing applique in the hoop, and that's what we call it, in the hoop, because everything is done in the hoop on the machine, is very, very easy. And you can get some really intricate designs. In fact, you can probably do, unless you are an absolute expert appliquer, somebody who's been doing it since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, you cannot get the intricacy of these designs that you can get doing it on your embroidery machine. And that's what we're going to show you today. But before we show you that today, we're going to do a live demo. Walter's going to be my cameraman for this. We want to talk about some tools. Well, of course you need your thread and an embroidery machine. Of course you need your hoops. All those things you have if you have an embroidery machine. You will need fabric, of course. You will need a pair of regular scissors. You will need some stabilizer. We'll talk about that in a minute, what kind. And I did say thread, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. The basics, okay? These are all the things you would need for any embroidery project. It's the technique that's a little different. But there is one other kind of thing that, do you absolutely need these? No, you don't, but it will make your life a heck of a lot easier, as you see when I demo. And that's called applique scissors or duckbill scissors. And you can see the shape of them. These are designed so that you can cut up very close to the edge of your stitches, something called tack down stitches, which we're going to talk about in the demo as well, so it'll make more sense. But you see, these will let you get very close to the stitches without usually cutting your stitches, because you don't want to cut the stitches. They're also bent. And the idea of this is that you can leave your hoop on your machine and trim around the pieces you need to trim on without taking the hoop out. I don't do that. I take the hoop out. Now, I don't say take the hoop apart. I am not taking the hoop apart. You do that, you're screwed. I mean, so easy as that. You can't do it. But you can, you'll see it today. You take the hoop out, and it's much easier to use these kind of scissors to get around. Now, there is another pair. I have never used these. I hate them. But Walter's going to tell you that he does use them.
Well, and the ones that you have are a slightly different style than the ones I have. I have these ones. They're not quite as bent, and they have a finer tip on them.
Yeah, they do.
And for some reason, I like using these for applique in the hoop. I'm not really sure why. I also have a pair of these ones that he has here. These are Quilter Select, the ones that he has. These ones. And they're good too. I like them too. But I like these a little better from my perspective. So you know, you don't have to go with the duckbill scissors. You can go with whatever works for you, right? You can try different kinds out, right? I have another pair of duckbill scissors that I bought, but that are bigger than Steve says, and I do not like these. Okay, they're the wide part's too big, and these don't. They're a rough cut. They don't cut as well. And I bought these online, I think at Amazon or something like this, and I don't really like these ones.
Now, these cut very well, and I didn't realize these were Quilter Select until just a few minutes before we started doing this today, and I read them, oh, QS, Quilter Select. I bought these. I've had these since I've had my embroidery machines. I bought them at my local quilt store, and I love them, and they've never gotten dull on me. They work really well, and you'll see them in use today, as I said, in a few minutes when we do the demo.
I don't know where I bought these. I have no idea. They were a scissor for sewing, but I don't know where I got them. And
these ones are Gnome ones, and I bought them.
Yeah, and they're similar to the Gnome ones. Like we said, Steve prefers the duckbill from Quilter Select. I kind of prefer these, though my second go-to is the Quilter Select one. I would try whatever you have hanging around. But if you can get a hold of a pair of decent scissors that are bent, that can get into your hoop.
These are an investment, okay? These are not cheap. They're $35, $40.
I think they're 45 the last.
It might be, yeah. So they're an expensive thing to have. But you want to know something? If you're going to do a lot of in the hoop applique, I recommend you invest in these.
The other thing they're good for if your garment sew is if you do something called grading your seams, and they're great for that as well.
So yeah, so if you're a dual sewist, if you're a quilter and a garment maker, well, if you're a garment maker, you probably already have a pair of these, maybe. But yeah, expensive, but good, but not absolutely necessary. Okay, but you'll see what we mean in a moment. Okay, so that's basically all you need. Same stuff you use for embroidery, plus some scissors like this with it. So you want to get everything organized. So first of all, where do you get your designs? Well, we've gone over that in an earlier session. So you just go to one of the embroidery sites like OESD, Urban Threads, Designs by Juju, whatever. They will have, just do a search, put in the hoop applique. You will find hundreds of projects. There are projects for table runners, placemats, bags, all kinds of things.
And some things called freestanding lace that employ applique in them.
Yes, sometimes there's crossovers. Next week, actually, little preview here, we're going to be talking about freestanding lace next week. But in the meantime, so you can find all kinds of designs, okay? Then you have to, you purchase it, you download it, you put it to a USB drive, you put the USB drive into your machine and call up the file. But something else that you should not neglect. Within the hoop applique, they will usually have project pages or a PDF that you can download that takes you step by step the process.
Yeah, that's usually with your file that you've purchased from a company. It will have accompany that project.
Yeah, and you do want to download it, and you do want to print it out or read it off your computer, but I suggest printing it out because unless your computer is sitting right next to your embroidery machine, and it probably is not, do not neglect those instructions. They are very important, and do follow them in the order that they put them in. Now, having said that, I tend to ignore the instructions and use them only as recommended. That's because I have done literally hundreds of in the hoop applique.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, the first few times that you do the in the hoop applique, you should really read the instructions and follow them around because they do things in certain steps. And if you forget to do a step, it can cause you.
It will screw up. It will screw up on you. And these are not complicated steps. They might be a little confusing when you first read them, depending on who wrote the instructions. But for the most part, I've always found the ones that come with the major ones, like OESD, Urban Threads, Scissor Tail Designs, which those ones are all part of OESD now. Designs by Juju, Sweet Pea. Those ones are always Kreative Kiwi. They're all very, very clearly written. Also, in the case of Kreative Kiwi, which is a company out of New Zealand, they often have YouTube videos that accompany many of their projects, so you can watch, and they are very good videos because she takes you through step by step on how to do it. So sometimes I do watch hers if I get something that's new and something very radically different than what I have done, then it's good to have that video and watch the video through as well. Now, having said all of that with it, The other thing too is as you get more experience within the hoop applique, more confident with it, you will take some shortcuts. You will realize that there are certain steps you can either double up on or in some cases delete completely, because it's all a question of understanding the process. And the process involves different types of stitches. Usually what happens is after you've got your stabilizer hooped and you've got your background fabric and whatever else you need to do all situated in the hoop, whether you're floating it like we talked about last week or actually putting in the hoop, and it's up to you on what your choice is on that. There isn't one method better than another when it comes to in the hoop appliques, whatever you're most comfortable with. I tend to float my fabric and hoop my stabilizer when I'm doing in the hoop applique, but not always, but usual. So the first stitch is usually something they call a placement stitch. So you just have your stabilizer in the hoop. You don't have anything else in the hoop at this point. And usually it's a box. It'll stitch out a single line box in the center of your hoop on your stabilizer. That's where you lay down your first piece of fabric. And you make sure you have the lines covered. So you're going to have a bigger piece of fabric than the actual stitched out box. And then from there, you may or you may not be trimming that at that point. The instructions will tell you what they want you to do. Then it may draw another shape, not draw, sew another shape. That's also a placement line. But let's say you had an Easter egg, okay? You've got some nice pink bunny background fabric that you've laid down on the hoop. Oh, sorry, I skipped a step. Okay, the placement's line there, your bunny fabric went down, then another line went all the way around, which looks exactly like the first line, except it's called a tack down stitch. What it's doing is it's connecting or sewing down your piece of fabric to the stabilizer to keep it stable. Now at this stage, you might be asked to trim something after the tack down stitch has gone down. You may not. Again, the instructions will tell you. Next thing is it's going to repeat the process for the first piece of fabric in your applique that you're going to be stitching down. So let's say it's an Easter egg on that background fabric. It will stitch out the shape of an Easter egg. You will take your fabric that you're going to use for that Easter egg and you're going to lay it down on top of that stitch line so that there's more fabric than line. So it's, you know, an amount that goes outside the line. Tack down stitch will be next. It'll sew that Easter egg piece of fabric down. You'll take it out of your hoop or leave it in your hoop. You'll grab your duckbill applique scissors and you will trim the fabric as close as you can get without cutting the tack down stitch line around it. You will see that in a minute. And then it goes on from there. It'll put down the placement line for the next design piece. You'll lay your fabric on top of that. There will be a tack down stitch. You'll trim it and move on. And that's how you build the applique design. That's all there is to it. That's really all there is to it. Now, at some point, you'll be finished laying down most of your fabrics, and it will switch over to probably a satin stitch. And it will go over all of those tack down lines and create a satin stitch to give it a nice finished look. Sometimes you'll get a satin stitch before you've got all the pieces laid down and that's why we said follow the instructions in the order that they appear, because that's important. Because they'll only do a partial satin stitch because there's going to be a piece up here. So say the top of the egg, for example, is a different color. Well, they'll want to put the satin stitch before they get up to the top of the egg. So there'll be part of that piece you already laid down that won't get a satin stitch. But then you lay down the next piece of fabric according to its instructions. And once that's trimmed up, then it'll do a satin stitch around that. So follow the instructions, especially the very first few times you use it. After that, you're going to know what's going to happen next because generally speaking, that's pretty much the order. Then when you've got it all done, You pop it out of the hoop and you'll trim the whole piece up to the size that you want. Now, if it's a single block, you might be going to sew into a quilt. Then you're going to want to make that block the size of your other blocks in the quilt and leave a 1/4 inch around the perimeter of the outside stitch line that was laid down at the very beginning, so that you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If it's a table runner where there's multiple pieces, the instructions will probably tell you to leave a 1/2 inch all the way around. And then there'll be instructions for sewing the pieces together. And when you sew those together, those are usually done on your domestic sewing machine. So yes, there is some sewing involved. It's very easy. The instructions will take you through that. In some cases, though, there are some in the Hoop Applique projects that are multiple pieces that are done in different hoopings, and you have to attach those pieces together. But the program is set up in such a way that you can stitch those pieces together, even though they don't all fit in one hoop size. But again, that's explained in your instructions. I have listed in the show notes below a video from Creative Kiwi showing you how to do one of those kind of applique projects. They're a little bit more involved, but not difficult. And she does a really good job of showing you what you have to do. I'll probably come back to that when we get a little closer to the end of today's session. But with all of that, anything you want to add to any of that right now?
No, that's good.
Okay, fine. Got seal of approval. So what we're going to do is we're going to get Walter set up with the mobile camera, i.e. the iPhone, and we're going to take you through a demonstration showing you how to do a very simple in the hoop applique.
Okay, cool.
Okay, my cameraman is situated, and we're going to show you this. So if cameraman, Walter, can you come down and show the bear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a very, very simple applique, but everything I'm going to show you on doing this project is exactly how you do any other applique, no matter how complicated. The only difference is there's probably more pieces to go into it. I'm just doing this one little figure, okay? So as I said earlier, I purchased this from one of the sites, downloaded it, and I've put it into the embroidery machine. So I know what hoop this is needed. This is my hoop size. This one's a small one, as you can see. So I'm using one of my smallest hoop. It told me on the embroidery machine, as we've said before, that it wanted me to use the 14B square hoop for my Gnome 550E, so I have it here. I have separated the hoop. Now, I need some stabilizer. So, there are two types of stabilizer I could use in this project. I could use tearaway stabilizer, which is fine, but it all depends on where this is going. If I'm going to do this on a t-shirt, which you could do, I would probably want to use no-show mesh because it's softer. If I'm putting it into a quilt that's going to get washed, or a table runner or a placemat, I'm going to want to use no-show mesh for it. Now, one tip about no-show mesh, which I don't know if we brought this up or not. When you press your final piece, do not use steam. No-show mesh will kind of warp and shrink a little under steam, okay? And it'll make your piece look really wonky. So don't use steam on it. Now, after it's gone through the washing machine, when it's inside something like a quilt or a table runner or whatever, then if you want to use a little steam after that, you can, because it will have already shrunk. Now, I know it's going through some of your minds. You say, but wait, if it shrinks, should you pre-wash it? No, you should not, okay? And it's not like washing your fabrics for a quilt if you were unsure of the shrinkage rate. If you were using different types of fabric, for example, maybe flannel with cotton and that. No, it's not like that.
I don't think it shrinks a whole lot.
No, it doesn't.
Because I've used it in a bag and used steam on it, and I haven't had too much of a problem.
The reason this goes wonky is because when you apply steam, there's already embroidery running through this. It causes the stitches to slightly stiffen up a little bit more, and they pull on it. That's all. And so you might get a slight bulge in the piece. So don't use steam on this. Okay, so you've got your piece the size of your hoop. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to hoop my stabilizer for this project for a reason. And my reason is this. Just let me get it in here first and tighten it up. Remember, just do finger tight. Do not use a screwdriver. Okay, it's done. The reason I'm hooping it is because I have some other things that are needed for this. I have a piece of batting out here. This is actually a piece of battleizer, and if you remember, I told you battleizer is batting, but it's a very low loft and a little denser than batting we put usually in a quilt. You can use regular batting for this as well, but I like using battleizer. I think it makes things like table runners and placemats especially lay very flat with it. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use it underneath, and if you see on the sample, here's my batting, and this is my piece of stabilizer. We'll talk about trimming when we get this done. It just makes things a little puffier. Still lays flat, but gives it a little bit more texture and loft to it. And especially if you're going to use this in a quilt, then you do want to have a little bit of batting in it. So then I've got my background fabric. Now, this is the one thing about in the hoop applique. If you've got a lot of scraps, this is a great way to use up your scraps because you only need small little pieces usually for everything that's there. But you will need a background fabric, okay? So I just picked some white and I'm going to float it like that. And then I have another piece of fabric which is for the bear, and I just grabbed something with a little bit of a design on it. Those choices are yours to make. Okay, so I'm going to hoop up my stabilizer and my batting and my first fabric. Now, this is a very simplified version of what most in the hoop applique is like. The principles are the same. Usually, if you're doing a regular one, you would hoop up your stabilizer. If it called for some batting, you would hoop up the batting too at the same time. You go to your machine, it would draw a placement line for your top fabric. You would then put down your fabric. It would do a tack down line to hold the fabric to the stabilizer and the batting. And then you would start doing other placement lines for whatever shapes you're going to have in there, and then tack down and do trimming. So we're going to skip a little bit of that because this is very simple. It only has about 3 stitches. So what we're going to do is I'm putting in my stabilizer. I'm using no-show mesh. I've got 2 layers of no-show mesh. I'm putting down a piece of batting. This is actually battleizer. Battleizer is lower loft than regular batting, but you could use regular batting if it calls for it. You don't always have to have batting. It depends on what you're going to do with it. If this was going to be a square that was going to go into a quilt, then you'd probably want to have batting in it. You might want to have it in a table runner or a placemat as well. The thing about battleizer is being a lower loft type of batting. It means that whatever piece you're making, especially if it's a table runner, it's going to lay flatter. Because, you know, on a table runner, you don't want, if you're going to put dishes on it to have stuff in them, you don't want it going tipsy-turvy. You want it to lay fairly flat. So I've got my stabilizer, as I said. I've got my battleizer. I'm going to hoop this. Make sure everything is secure in the hoop. Tighten up the nut. And we're going to take it over to the machine. I have my pattern already loaded up, as I mentioned before.
It needs to start.
Yes, I know. I've got to get to my first one again.
Okay.
Okay. I'm at the beginning of it, the first stitch. I just see the outline. By hitting that, I see the whole design.
Okay. And then that button you just puts it on the first line, shows you the first line of stitching that you're doing, right?
Yeah. And it goes down from
and
there.
It shows down there on the number 1, and it's listed as a 274 color, but it's up to you what you want to use.
Yeah, you pick whatever colors you like. Okay, so here it is. I'm all threaded. I'm all ready to go. I'm going to do the outline of the bear. Now, I could have skipped this step as well, because I'm going to repeat this step again in a moment. I'm going to back the machine back up to this first step when I lay down my backing fabric. But I just want you to see that in the case of some that would just do an outline for where the batting has to go, this would be
and these steps would all be outlined in your instructions, that you come with whatever project you're doing.
So read your instructions, okay? It will help, especially the first few times. Okay, so it is finished doing that outline. So I am going to put it back to that line again. And lay down my background fabric. Have I got the right side up or the wrong side up? Not that it matters for this demo too much, but you want the right side up, of course. So I know that placement line shows me that yes, I've got plenty of fabric here to cover it, because I want to cover it.
So you're just floating the fabric on top of your hoop, right?
I am. So
you're doing this step all over again with this fabric on it.
That's right. This is basically going to hold this, because I'm floating it down to the other layers. And it's also going to show me where to put my bare fabric. The fabric I'm actually going to use inside the bare. Now, as we said, read your instructions that come with your design, because it'll take you through it step by step. I'm combining several instructions at once because this design...
This is just to show you a simple design, right?
Yeah.
As a demo.
As a demo. Okay. Now, I've got my fabric. It's bigger than my outline. I'm not trimming this fabric, because I want to leave access for the size of the block that I'm going to use. I'll trim that all up after I'm finished the whole thing.
This fabric here that you've got tacked down right now is your background fabric.
Is my background fabric.
And now you want to put the applique fabric down.
That's right. This is the fabric I've chosen for my bear. So I'm laying it over top of this, and I'm going to do that same stitch again.
Oh, no. Okay, I just thought you were...
No, I wasn't. Leave me alone.
Okay, so you're running this stitch again to tack down your applique fabric.
Yes. And this is the fabric I'm going to be trimming in a moment. And we'll show you how those duck-bill scissors work for this kind of thing. Think about this if you were doing traditional applique on your sewing machine. On your sewing machine, you would have had already cut out your shape and then laid the shape down. So I would have cut out my bear from my fabric. I probably would have stabilized it by putting some fusible, like steam-a-seam or something like that in the back, placed it on wherever I was going to put it in my project, used my iron to hold it down, and then I would do my stitching all the way around it. This, I don't have to worry about cutting out the shape.
Yeah, you don't have to pre-cut your shape out. It's stitching around your shape so that you can cut it out later, right?
Yeah. So you can see the stitching. There's my bear. What I want to do is remove all this excess fabric on the outside of the bear. And so this is how we do it. And this is very easy with these scissors. Okay, you use the wide part of the scissor to go closest to your stitch line. And you just pull up your fabric a little bit. Cut towards without cutting the stitches, but get as close as you can. And then you just go around. Now, the trick here is tug on your fabric gently, because that will actually help to guide your scissors around it. This is the part of in the hoop applique I actually like doing.
Yeah, it's fun to cut that stuff off.
But you see how easy it is by me just tugging on the fabric a little. Again, I'm just being careful that I don't cut into the stitches. Now, you want to get as close as you can, because this is a raw edge right now. It's just got a single line of stitching holding it down. And when we go back to the machine, we're going to put our satin stitch on it, and the satin stitch is going to stitch over that line. But if you have too much fabric away from this line, it's not going to get buried in the satin stitch, and you're going to have a problem because it's going to fray. So I'm just gently tugging on it. And this is why these scissors are so much better than trying to do it with your regular shears, well, first of all, your regular shears would be too big to get in here. You could use smaller scissors, but you're going to find that that's going to be very awkward.
Plus, they don't have the bend in the scissors that help you get down into the hoop.
See, I've got that. Now, yes.
And a lot of them are sold as applique scissors, right? Or
yes, they're called applique scissors. If you go into your local quilt store and ask for a pair of applique scissors, they will know exactly what you mean. Now, they might show you those other ones that we showed you that I don't use because I don't like them, but Walter does. Again,
it's a personal preference.
You will figure it out once you've done a couple of these, which scissors you like the best. But be prepared for the expense because it is an investment.
Yeah, and those scissors are also actually very sharp too, so that it's easy for you to cut.
Yeah, you want sharp scissors. You do not want something that's going to catch on the fabric and pull because it'll pull up your stitches. We're going to talk about what happens if you did cut a stitch in a bit. Okay, so there we go. Now you may have a few stray little pieces that frayed. Just cut them off. Just take a look at it, cut it off. I usually give it a little brush like I'm doing right now to get rid of any of those. And now we're going to put it back in the machine. Remember, I did not take this out of the hoop. I just took the whole thing off the hoop.
Yeah, make sure you don't try and take it out of the hoop,
because you won't get it lined up again. Okay, it's in here, and so we're on the next stitch set, and that's a satin stitch, which is going to go all the way around this, and it's going to bury those raw edges.
Yeah, so now you're on stitch type 2, right?
Yeah, in this particular design. Okay, now I'm stopping it because I've got this long tail and it's getting buried in. So I'm just clipping it off. Do not do that when the machine is running.
Why not?
Well, you can try it. If you like having your finger as a permanent part of your applique. Now, the first time this goes around, it's going to go around twice. First time it does a zigzag stitch. That's just to catch all the raw edges and to give a foundation for the satin stitches. Now you might wonder, can you do something besides satin stitch? Well, yes and no. You won't be able to program it in. It will be something that is done by the file already, unless you have a digitizer where you can go in and change the style of the stitches. But you have to know how to use a digitizer, and I'm not going to teach you how because I'm still trying to learn. And it's a very steep learning curve for that. Sometimes your satin stitches, this one's going to do a basic satin stitch. If you look here, for example, we're very familiar with a satin stitch. But on some files, they will go over the satin stitch with little circles or little patterns, and so your satin stitch will become a pattern stitch as well, a decorative, more decorative stitch. Have you got things in focus here?
Yes,
You're still playing around with it. So yeah, not every design, or even within the same design, depending on how elaborate it is, will do a straight satin stitch. Sometimes it will do a more decorative stitch.
So now we're going around here the second time, right?
Yeah, now we're doing the satin stitch. Look at this. This is going to take a little while because my machine says, on the time on the machine says, that was your cue, you move the cue. It's going to take it 7 minutes to finish this. We're not going to stand here for 7 minutes, or make you stand here for 7 minutes. We're going to come back in a second when this is done. Okay, so we're just coming up to the finishing stitches here on the bear. And you can see, so now we don't have any raw edges. Everything's nicely sealed in under the satin stitches. And this very simple applique is now done except for one thing. Now there is another stitch here. I might as well do it. It puts an eye on the bear. And I'm just doing it the same color. And there's the bear's eye. So now it's done. We'll take it out and we're going to take it apart. Now you may have a little jump stitch in some spots. All you need to do is just pull them up, clip them. That's it. Okay, so take him out of the hoop. Now we've got all this excess batting and we have the stabilizer on the back of it. So we want to get rid of as much stabilizer as we can. So I have this nifty little ruler. You don't need one of these, but I really like it. It's a great tool. It's called Trimmer by George. Mm-hmm. It's from the Hoop Sisters. They're the people who created, had the patent on it. You may find it in your local quilt store. You can get it on Amazon, I believe. You can get it from a quilt store online as well. They're not cheap. I think I paid about $60 Canadian for it. So for American, it's about 10 cents. With that.
It's more like about $40, right?
But what makes this unique from other rulers? Well, you have markings on it just like you would on any other ruler, except you have this lip. See the lip? Little steel lip here. So what you do is you turn it over so that lip is facing up, and you pull back your batting. And of course, if this design had what I told you before, a square placement line for the batting, I would just butt it right up against that line here. I'm sort of guesstimating. So I put it there. Now you see what's happening is my stabilizer's hanging out ready to be cut, but I'm protecting my top fabric and my batting. And I just cut all the way around 4 sides. So I'm getting rid of that. I know. Just Walter gets so panicky. He sees me do one little thing as if I wasn't going to.
Yeah, well, if I don't correct you and then you do it, you'll be upset.
Okay, 2 words. Bite me. All right. So we're getting rid of the excess fabric. Again, don't have to have one of these. You could do this simply just pull it back and,
Yeah, I don't have one of those. I just trim it.
Yeah, but I'm a professional.
And Steve doesn't let me use his, so.
Well, I didn't say you couldn't use it. I just thought if it went up into your sewing room, I'd never see it again. Because things get lost in your black hole of Calcutta. Okay, so that got rid of my excess stabilizer, so it's just there. If you were using a tearaway, you could probably just start to rip it and it would just go around the line. Yeah. For that. Now, I want to trim this down to the block size. I could use this. Again, if I had a placement line here, I could line this up and put it on the 1/4 inch line and trim all the way around. I don't have one for this, but just to make it square, I'm just going to grab a square ruler. And, it's not really centered because I didn't place it in the right spot when I did this, but that's okay. I don't care. This is just a demo. But you get the idea. Ooh, that's something happened there up in there. Now, of course, you would trim it to whatever size you need for whatever project you're doing. Need a new blade, I think. But there we go. So my piece is done. Okay? That's the basics of how you do in the hoop applique. From there, that's basically how you do it. It just means there's more fabric, more pieces that you have to sew around for any other project. It's that simple. So, some things to talk about. Tips. I already talked about what kinds of stabilizer I'm using. But when I was trimming it, and I said, do not cut those lines, the placement line or the satin stitch. Generally speaking, you wouldn't have to worry about satin stitch because you are not going to be cutting around by the satin stitch in most cases. But if you cut into a placement line when you're doing the trimming, don't despair, because the satin stitch that's going to go around, and you notice this one started with a zigzag stitch, will make sure the fabric's laying flat on there. It will sew over top of that, and it will catch your fabric. You don't have to worry about that. The only thing you'd have to worry about is if you cut into the fabric underneath.
Yeah,
that,
if you cut into the applique fabric so far that the satin stitch isn't going to cover,
yeah. Okay, sort of. I'm going to talk about that in a second. If you cut into or what you could do too is, because it's already still in your hoop and you haven't taken it out, you can put the hoop back in and just do that line again, and it may catch on that edge, but you have to make sure that it's smooth.
You could probably put a second piece of fabric over top of it.
Well, I was going to get to that, because sometimes, but before I talk about that, if you cut into your satin stitch, the satin stitches will start to unravel. Do you need to abandon the project? Maybe not. Just go back and do the satin stitch again around. Now, you could just do it in that one spot. Yes, you're going to have a little thicker stitch in that part because it's going to go a satin stitch over top of a satin stitch, but it's not going to be noticeable. It's not going to cause you pain, and your needle's very sharp and it's very powerful. It can go through that thread again. So you don't have to, you can salvage it if you do that. Now, what Walter's talking about, if we cut into the fabric, put another piece of fabric down. Yes, you can do it all over again. You don't have to rip out the stitches that are already there. You don't have to rip out that piece of fabric. Put another piece of fabric over top of it, just like you did before, and let it do the whole thing over top of it. Yeah, that piece is going to be a teensy bit thicker, but it's not going to cause you any grief. I've done that many times. Or what often happens is you don't get your fabric placed exactly, and there's a little piece, say like maybe down here, the tip of his little foot didn't have any fabric covering it. Again, just put another piece of fabric all the way around it and let it restitch over top of it, and you'll be okay. Okay, so you can salvage it if that happens to you. Okay, so I have two other pieces I want to show you right here. These are a classic sunbonnet Sue. And essentially, I did the sunbonnet Sues exactly the same way as I did the bear. The difference here is there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of fabric in it. And it builds. But the first one it did was this, then it did this, then it did the mitt, then it did the sleeve. You see the overlap?
Mm-hmm.
And it did this. And it did the satin stitching before the next piece went on, because it looks like the satin stitching is underneath, but it really isn't. It stopped there at that point. It's the same procedure. However, this design came from AccuQuilt. So if you have an AccuQuilt machine, a lot of their shape dies, the ones that do these, you know, the sunbonnet Sue, the bear, things like that, you can buy for about $5, $5.09, I think it was the other day. It may have been on sale. I don't know. I have a feeling they're always on sale. For $5 US, you can buy the corresponding embroidery file. And that will stitch down your design. You would cut your pieces though. Now, this is the difference between the method I showed you. You have the die for sunbonnet Sue. You put your fabric on the die. You cut out all of these pieces. Then you load up your hoop with your stabilizer. You do the first placement line. It'll draw a space where in this case, the shoes are supposed to go. And then you'll lay your fabric down like I did with the bear, and it'll stitch it down, and then it'll do a satin stitch, and then it'll draw the placement line for the skirt.
So you wouldn't have any trimming, right?
That's right. You wouldn't have any trimming. But, okay, don't tell the AccuQuilt people. I told you this. I find with AccuQuilt, I never buy these designs. The reason being is they're one-offs. Unless I was going to make a sunbonnet Sue quilt and I want to do it this way, I might invest in the die for that. But probably I wouldn't. Because if I have bought the embroidery design, I can do each of my blocks just like I've done here using that method I showed you with the bear. I don't have to cut out the shape. I just need a placement line, which the embroidery file will put down. I know exactly how much fabric I need. I lay the piece of scrap fabric down. It does the tack down. I take it out of the machine. I trim it around. I put it back in. It does a satin stitch and so on, like that. So that is a possibility as well, okay? I'm sure the AccuQuilt people don't want to do it that way. In fact, go to AccuQuilt and look at some of their videos where they show using the dies in conjunction with their embroidery files that go with it. It's a lot of time. They have a paper doll one they just recently came out with, or it looks like a paper doll. And what it does is, you have the die, it cuts out the body shape, it cuts out the dress shape, it cuts out the hair shape. Then the embroidery file stitches out a placement line for the body shape. So you've cut out the body shape, you try to line it up with that, lay it down. They talk about putting a fusible stabilizer on the back of those pieces, or using spray basting spray, and then using one of those little tiny irons, you know, the little ones that look like a soldering iron, and going over that on a wool mat with it in the hoop to tack it all down, and then they stitch it down. This is faster, and it's the same end result. Now, the other thing about the AccuQuilt embroidery files, they come with 3 stitches. They come with what they call a blanket stitch, which is a traditional applique. So I could have gone around this with a blanket stitch if I wanted that look. It comes with a satin stitch, so that's what I used here. It also comes with what they call a motif stitch, which is a little fancier stitch that I was mentioning earlier in your satin stitch. Has a little bit more texture to it than that. So those 3 stitches come with the one file, and you can choose what you want. But why cut out shapes when you can do it the way I just showed you? You don't have to worry about that. That's an extra step. And to cut out those shapes, you have to do it with scissors. You have to physically cut all the way around to get the shape. Oh, no, sorry, you'd be using the die.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, you'd be using the die. What am I jumping to? Yeah, make it more common. You'd be using the die. Well, the die costs $50, $60, $70. The embroidery file costs $5. Okay, for $5 I can get the same effect without buying the die, especially if I'm not going to use the die very often. So, just a tip on there. Now, what I have done, and I'm going to insert it here, is I'm going to show you how I made these. These two are the same design, except I did something different. This one, I used tearaway stabilizer on the back, no batting. This one, I used batting, but I also used my embroidery machine to quilt it before I put those down.
Nice.
Now, I should have made that a little bigger. I didn't at the time, but there's nothing saying you can't combine your applique with other files you also have. So you see, I did quilt as you go, and I put batting in behind it. I've trimmed it up. I can now, if I made a whole bunch of these, I could make a quilt. All I need to do is just join them, and I've got a quilt or a wall hanging. So that's another thing you do. But I'm going to insert right now a little bit more. It runs about 11 minutes. Video that I made showing you how I made these and everything. It'll give you the ins and outs. So, did you know you can get embroidery files from all kinds of different sites online, but you can also get them from AccuQuilt. And what makes them a bit on the unique side is the fact that you can couple these embroidery designs with a die, and what'll happen is you can sew down your applique from the die using the embroidery file that matches it, which is really quite interesting. So in order to get these files, let's say you bought a certain die and you wanted to see if there was an embroidery file for it, you would just go to the AccuQuilt homepage and click up here to embroidery, and it'll show you, when it pulls down, all these different designs. And so these match the particular die. So you can find all kinds of them. They do have a few freebies as well. Now, one of the freebies that I did, that I downloaded, and how do I find the freebies? Easy. Go up to the search box and put in free embroidery. And you'll get a list. And there was a sunbonnet soup. There she is. And you notice it's $0. They said the regular price is $18, but they put these on freebies up every so often. So I clicked on that and I downloaded it. And I'm going to show you how you use this particular file in your embroidery hoop to do in the hoop embroidery. It's really easy, and it's going to save you a lot of time. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a file that came from AccuQuilt. Yes, AccuQuilt's not associated with embroidery files, but they have started this now with the dies, with some of their dies. They also embroidery files so you can do the applique in the hoop. And that's what I'm going to attempt today with a sunbonnet Sue. I picked a sunbonnet Sue because it's a fairly classic kind of design. Also, what I'm doing with this is I'm not doing it exactly as they want you to do it. They want you to cut out each of the pieces of fabric and then lay them on the stabilizer in your hoop and then do the stitching all the way around them. I'm going to do it the way I usually do in the hoop applique, which means I will trim the fabric from the design while it's still in the hoop. So you'll get the idea when you see what I'm doing here. But the first thing is I've got my file called up and it wants to put a little outline down here at the bottom, which is little sunbonnet Sue's feet. Now I've got a light colored thread in here, mainly because I didn't change it. So I'm going to take a second and just change it. Okay, so today I'm going to show you how I would do an in the hoop applique using a file that comes from AccuQuilt. Yes, AccuQuilt does make embroidery files, but they're meant to work with certain dies that you're going to cut the pieces out first using the die and then use your embroidery machine with the embroidery file to stitch down the applique. And these files, usually you pay around $5.99 for them. $5.09, I think I saw last time in US funds. And this way you don't have to put the applique into your domestic sewing machine. They do have 3 different stitches. They have a running stitch, they have a blanket stitch, and they have a satin stitch. So I'm going to do the satin stitch one for the sunbonnet Sue. I picked Sunbonnet Sue for 2 reasons. One, I don't have the die for it, so I wasn't paying for the embroidery file, and this is a free embroidery file. They have a few of them that are free. This is just for demo purposes. The other thing is, by doing Sunbonnet Sue, it's a very simple one. I only need about 2 colors of fabric plus background fabric. So you can see right now what I've done is I've hooped up 2 layers of tearaway stabilizer, and on top of that, I am floating my background fabric, which is just a simple piece of white fabric. And I have loaded my machine with black thread, so you can see what's happening. Now, I don't do it the way they would do it. You would already have the die, you would cut out the pieces, you would lay the pieces down, there'd be a placement stitch for them, and stitch around that. I'm going to do it the way I usually do in the hoop applique, and that is put down a piece of fabric, don't worry about cutting out the shape, have the machine stitch it down, a tack down stitch, and then trim it from there. And you'll see what I mean in a moment here. But right now, I'll have to tell you this, that I will probably have to repeat the same stitching step in order to do this, because this file has been set up to work with a die where the pieces are pre-cut. But that's not a problem. So let's start with the placement of Sue's feet. So this is where Sunbonnet Sue's feet are going to go. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to lay down the fabric for this, but I'm going to repeat this line so I can trim it. Now, of course, this is not how their file is designed, but it's the way I want to do it. So I'm going to move this back over. I'm going to grab a piece of fabric, lay it down, and I'll show you what comes next. So I have cut out a piece of fabric, just a scrap piece of fabric, because I didn't need a very big piece. And I've laid it down over top of where that, what I'm calling now the placement line, was stitched out. And I'm going to stitch that placement line again. And I didn't go back to the beginning, so I need to do that. Okay, there we go. Now, for the sake of making this particular line a little bit more secure, I'm going to go do the same thing again. So I'm going to raise my foot. I'm just going to go back to the beginning, put down my foot, do it again. This just makes my sew line a double one, which makes it a little bit more secure. Because I will be tugging on it as I trim the fabric from this piece. Okay, so now I'm going to remove my piece from the hoop and I'm going to trim it using my applique scissors, my duckbill applique scissors. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim this fabric around that line with my applique scissors. I just cut very close to the line without cutting it. And I just gently tug on the fabric as I go around this piece. You want to be as close as you possibly can, because the satin stitch is going to cover this up. You don't want any raw edges peeking out from underneath your satin stitching. So trim very close, as I said, around to this without cutting your stitches. So I'm going to put this back in my machine and let the satin stitch happen. Okay, so I've got it back in the machine. Let's get the satin stitch on. Now, I want to change my color of thread though for this, and I think I want to do it in the color that I've got the shoes in. So that means I need to put in a blue thread. So I will do that now. Okay, I've loaded my blue thread and now I'm ready to do the satin stitch. Now the first thing this file does is do a little running stitch around the edge of the piece, and then it does a zigzag stitch, and then it's going to take that and do it as a satin stitch, and here it goes. So we'll let that carry on. As you can see, we've got a very nice satin stitch going all the way around the outside of this piece. And you can notice this is why we need to trim very close to that tack down line so that any loose threads, like the fraying of the fabric, get trapped inside the satin stitches, because we don't want any raw edges. Now, if by chance a little piece you didn't get quite close enough in a certain section, you can trim that away after the satin stitch is done. But you have to be very careful that you do not cut into the satin stitches or they'll all unravel. Okay, it is done. So now the next thing is the outline for Sunbonnet Sue's little dress. And I could change my thread now back to a black or whatever. I'm just going to leave it in this color of blue because it's going to get buried anyways in whatever the satin stitch I use on this piece will be. So we'll just carry it right on and let it do the outline. And notice it goes over the other piece. You didn't put a satin stitch all the way around it because that piece is going to be buried under the dress. Okay, that's finished the outline. So what I'm going to do next, same thing I did with heat part, I'm going to cut a piece of fabric for the skirt, but I'm going to go back and repeat this tack down, or this placement stitch, twice to hold down the fabric. And then I'm going to trim the fabric in the same manner as I trimmed the piece down here for the feet. So as you can see here, what I've done is I laid down my fabric. I had it do the placement line for it, the tack down line, trimmed it, put it back in, and now I have it doing the satin stitch all the way around. It's just coming to the end of that. And there we are. So now the next thing is to have it do Sunbonnet Sue's little hand. And I'm going to have a placement line put on this. I'm not going to change my thread. Yes, I am going to change my thread. Do you know why I'm going to change it? Because I want you to be able to see the stitching. So I'll come right back. So I've decided that Sunbonnet Sue's little middle hand is going to be with orange. So I changed my thread out to orange for the outline. And I'm going to let that do its thing right now. And I know you probably can't see that, but it is there. And I'm just going to leave the orange thread in. There's a little tail here I want to cut away. Never cut away your tails when the machine is running for obvious reasons. You don't want to stitch your body parts to your applique. Okay, so I've got my orange fabric laid down in that spot, and I'm just going to back up the machine so it will repeat that placement stitch, which now is going to become my tack down stitch. And like I did on the other pieces, I'm going to go around this twice, which means I have to back it up to that stitch line again. So here it goes the second time around. And then I'm going to remove from the machine, trim that, and do the satin stitch, just as I've done on the other pieces around the mitt. So as you can see, I finished the satin stitch around Sunbonnet Sue, yes, so that's her name, Sunbonnet Sue's mitt. And now I've done the outline for the sleeve, and I'm going to do it in blue. So the outline I have done in blue, and I have my piece of scrap fabric here. Make sure your fabric is always big enough to cover that line. And so I can put that down and repeat that line as I have done before. Now I'm just wondering if I'm fine. Okay. Just want to make sure that my piece of fabric is covering lots of room all the way around that tack down line. And the same procedure. I'm going to let this do that line again to make it really strong. And then I'm going to take it off. I'm going to trim the fabric and do satin stitch around the sleeve. It's the same procedure for every piece of this project. Okay, so the embroidery machine is just finishing up going around Sue's bonnet with the satin stitch. And that's the last stitch for this particular design. So once it has finished this, I can remove it from the hoop and I'll trim it up. And I'll show you what it looks like after I have it all trimmed up. So I've trimmed up my pieces now, and they're ready now to be put into a quilt, or possibly put in as a wall hanging, or I could even make a table runner, or I could make placemats. There are so many different things I could do with these now that I have got them all finished. But I wanted, you notice there are two here, right? So I want to tell you what the difference is. This is the first one that we made. And this one I did in the more traditional style. I embroidered it on a piece of background fabric, and I used tearaway stabilizer in it. And that's fine. This would work in a wall hanging, would work in a table runner. It depends. If you're going to wash the item that it's going to go in, like a quilt or possibly placemats or something like that, you probably don't want to use tearaway stabilizer. You're probably want to use no-show mesh. And that's what I did with this one. I used no-show mesh in here. So now it can be washed and it'll be fine. But what I also did with this second one that's a little different from the first one is I added a layer of batting. I actually used Battleizer, which is a very low loft batting, which is great for table runners and wall hangings and things like that that you want to lay very flat. But how I did that was I hooped it a little differently. On this first one, I hooped the stabilizer and I floated my background fabric on top. In this one, I hoop my no-show mesh stabilizer and my batting. And then I floated my fabric on top of that. Now, there are other ways you could do this. It's whatever gives you the result that you want. But that's what I did with this piece. Now, I did use a different background on this one simply because I didn't have any more of the one I used on the other. So that's why you see these leaves. But if you look at it very, very carefully, peeking around Sue, I did some quilting. I laid down a quilting stitch. It's an embroidery file first before I did anything else. Now, I should have made that embroidery file a little larger to fill out this square a little bit more. And if I was doing this as an actual project that I was going to put into something, I would have made that bigger. But for the sake of the demo, I didn't. But you can see it's right there. So there's quilting in the background. So then I did basically the same thing as I did on the first one in terms of placement stitches, tack down stitches, and the embroidery stitches, the satin stitch. Say that 5 times fast, but you know what I mean. But now, if I wanted to do this as a block in a quilt, not a problem. It's quilt as you go because I've already got my quilting right there with it. So you can see it's using in the hoop applique is really not a one-off. There are many, many things you can do with that. And the beauty, too, of these designs they work in conjunction with the AccuQuilt dies or without them. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of So Chatty, all about in the hoop applique. And tune in next time when we talk about another aspect of in the hoop or embroidery in general. Okay, so I hope that didn't confuse you. It isn't hard. Follow the directions you get with the file. You've opened up a whole new world of what your embroidery machine can do. And by coupling it, as I said, with some of the other designs you might already have or that, it's endless. On that Sunbonnet Sue, if I want to, I could use other embroidery files on my machine to decorate her dress. I could put a little border of flowers on it. I could put an initial in it. Whatever. You can take various applique files or parts of them and create a scene. You know, maybe I've got Sunbonnet Sue, but I've got another in the hoop applique that does a sunflower. So I might want to, in my piece that I'm making, add an applique sunflower with Sunbonnet Sue, and maybe a cloud in the sky or a sun or something like that. You could, just by using different ones, stitching them out. Endless possibilities. I hope that's getting your brain going and you're thinking, ooh. So yeah, you can make it your own. Okay, so if you have any questions about this, you can leave them in the comment section and we'll try to answer them next week. In the meantime, I don't have any questions from last week's, so I did have something. I just recently joined a Facebook group, or was invited to join it, called the Atlantic Coast Embroiderers. It's out in, not sure if I think they're Nova Scotia, but I'm not really sure. I was invited to join their group. They're a very active group. They show what they've been working on. They share tips and tricks and all kinds of things. If you're interested in joining the group, you can. It's not hard. It's open to any machine embroiderers. It's called Atlantic Coast Embroidery. And of course, it's Canadian. So just do a search for it on Facebook and you can join up. But Kim, who is the moderator for that group, sent me a note asking me to bring this up to you on the behalf of the Atlantic Coast Embroiderers. And this is what she asked. She says, could you mention in one of your embroidery segments, number one, if you see Facebook posts for a free design, don't click on it. Go to the site that is offering and download from there. We had a person in our group that got a computer virus, and it was traced back to the free design. That's a very good point. Beware of where you get your designs. My suggestion is, for reasons like computer viruses, but for some other reasons too, go to a reputable company online like OESD or all the other ones, Designs by Juju, Sweet Pea, Kreative, Kreative Kiwi, because one, you know you're not going to get a virus. Two, you know that their files have been tested. The people that make their files know how to use digitizing programs and do it the right way. I would beware of Etsy shops. Now, I'm not saying all Etsy shops don't know what they're doing, but there may be some on there that they are trying to make a little home-based business. They bought themselves a digitizer, but they don't know, because digitizers take a lot to learn, and have done something that may or may not work very well in your machine.
Yeah, not only that, sometimes these home-based places, they will get a virus on their computer and not realize they have a virus on their computer. So then they'll put a file up, and they're not necessarily being malicious by putting a file up that you're getting your virus from, but because they've got it on their home computer and they put it up, and it's got the virus contained in their file that they've put up, and then somebody clicks on it and downloads it by accident and get something.
Yeah. It's just common sense about buying anything in this day and age online, whether it's an embroidery file or it's a piece of electronics or whatever you're buying. You have to beware of who's selling it to protect yourself. The second point she wanted me to raise with you was this. The machines are an investment and they need proper surge protection. Spend the money and protect the electronics in your machine. That isn't bad advice, especially if you live in an area where you have a lot of blackouts or brownouts or things like that, where your electrical power is unstable. I do not have my machines on a surge protect. I have not, knock wood, had any problem. If a thunderstorm starts to roll in suddenly with heavy lightning, I would say stop what you're doing and unplug your machine with it. This is good advice.
It also would depend on what machine you have. Like if you've got a Gnome regular sewing type machine, you may not be as vulnerable as if you've got one of these 12 needle industrial units. You may be more vulnerable to that.
Yeah. I mean, my Lucy, my long arm, is on a very, very elaborate uninterrupted power supply, a UPS with surge protects in it. Like it was $1,000 for that box. But when you're investing $40,000 into the long arm, you want to make sure that, you know, especially because of the computer component that I have on it, you want to make sure, you know, you're protected with that. But that is good advice, you know, so nothing wrong with doing that. Do beware, though, there are some power bars you can buy that are like under $10 or whatever, or at the dollar store, and they say, oh yeah, surge protect. No, that's not a surge protect. What they have in them is a little breaker fuse, which helps, but it's not, the breaker fuse may not go off if there's a huge surge of power suddenly. It won't stop the surge necessarily from going through into your machine and burning out your electronics. And of course, you have to remember, your embroidery machine is a computer, okay? And computers are susceptible to that kind of thing. So those are a couple of very good tips that Kim from Atlantic Coast Embroiders want me to bring up with you, and I have done so. Do with that which you will. Yeah, so I think that's about it. So next week, we're going to do freestanding lace, which is one of my favorites as well. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, so I guess we're going to go. So say goodbye, Walter.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.